I love these evenings of storytelling. Amen. We gather, it's just like the library when you were children, and I would read out of a book to you and use different voices and go back to into the back of the library and get a cocktail. It's just exactly like that. Our final guest lives outside the box, way outside the box. It's difficult to list all the GLBT organizations he has participated in and chaired, but just a few is the Oaklawn Counseling Services, Black Tie Dinner, and Resource Center's Toast to Life. He has just finished his 2-year term as chairman of the board of the Dallas Way. He's a respected landscape architect with a degree from Texas Tech University, known by many and loved by all. He has lived in Dallas for 24 years with his partner, Joel Harris, married for 24 years. Please welcome our last guest of the evening, Buddy Mullino.
Thank you, sir.
So last but not least, I would like to ask you to go back with me to the period that Lisa just took us to 1978. Now I see that we have some people in the audience who don't remember 1978, and we're very excited to have you. But most of you do remember, and most of you were here. So 1978, it was a great year to be out as a gay man or woman. It was a decade after the Stonewall riots in New York. Gay people were stepping out in large numbers and feeling empowered. The men in Dallas were showing off their moves and their bodies on the dance floor to the tunes of Donna Summer and to Sylvester. In their Izod shirts and their 501 jeans and their white athletic shoes. And the Izods were usually off by the time the dance floor filled up. There was a faint smell of poppers often prevalent on the dance floor, and the feeling throughout the club was generally happy and carefree. On the premise of visiting friends at the livestock show at the State Fair of Texas, I was visiting in Dallas on Texas OU weekend of 1978. I never quite made it to the fairgrounds, but I had a great time one afternoon exploring the bars along Fitzhugh. Now, I had never been in a gay bar before. I didn't even know there was such a thing, probably. But I had recently noticed a gay publication on the newsstand that caught my attention, and I picked it up and read about the gay scene, and part of what they talked about in that article was the gay scene in Dallas. So I immediately knew it was somewhere I wanted to explore, just to see what it was like, just one time. So I had a great time on Fitzhugh that afternoon, and later that evening, I had barely made it past the cruisy smiles of the doorman at the old plantation on Harwood, which I later learned was referred to by the OP by most, when I felt a tremendous sensation that I had arrived indeed at the right place. That this was my tribe. This is where I belonged. A brand new door opened up immediately, and my life changed forever. I was very fortunate that night to meet a man who later introduced me to gay life and coached me in all the need-to-know facts of the lifestyle. And no doubt I was a very quick study. I later learned that not every newcomer to the scene was fortunate as I to get the guided tour from such an understanding and compassionate guide. But as I drove home the next day out of the Metroplex and westward toward home, I remember reflecting back on what had been an incredible and magical experience. Certainly a one-time adventure that I was going to cherish for a long time. And by the time I reached Haskell County 4 hours later, the previously mentioned man's phone number, which had narrowly escaped being tossed out of my window onto the open road, was now a sacred treasure and a connection to this gay Mecca that I had just discovered. My mind was already in high gear and autopilot, plotting ways that I could orchestrate another weekend among my newly found tribe for just one more time. Fortunately, I can be creative and resourceful at times, and I was able to orchestrate many of these weekend, sometimes long weekend, getaways. The late 70s and earliest 80s were indeed a magical period for gay men and women. There was a growing community, and public recognition of that community was increasing. Instead of hiding behind dark, hidden entrances, gay bars were opening their doors to the streets, and one even had huge glass windows. No one had ever heard the word AIDS, HIV, ARC, GRID, or even safe sex. And if condoms were ever displayed in the bar, I never noticed them. So it was a happy time. But in contrast to the utopia, there was also a lingering dark side of gay life present during this period. There was a great deal of discrimination and unacceptance still being directed toward the gay communities. Being terminated or discriminated in the workplace just for being gay was not unheard of. Neither was being tossed to the curb by one's landlord or one's family. Friends were not always understanding or accepting when they found out you were gay. Men were being arrested in all kinds of various locations and venues for having sex with other men. It was not necessarily okay for two people of the same sex to walk down the street, even in Oak Lawn, holding hands, or to sit together in restaurants, or to check in to the same hotel room. It might have been chic to have gay friends, but it wasn't always safe for that chic gay friend to be out at work. All these things often kept some of the people hiding behind closed closet doors, at least during the work week, and were the cause of a great deal of psychological issues for gay people who sometimes were already struggling to decide if they were okay or not okay. This often led to lots of medication with alcohol and/or drugs, sometimes resulting in substance abuse and addiction, which could lead to all kinds of other problems in life. So there was a definite need for gay people to be able to seek counseling and psychological help. But more often than not, the psychotherapist with whom the gay person engaged would take the approach that their problems, whatever they might be, could not really be tackled until the issue of their homosexuality was worked out. Some therapists even seemed to think that solving the homosexual tendencies issue would solve any other issue the patient was dealing with. The few psychologists who were around who understood that homosexuality was not the problem were difficult to find, and they often charged a lot of money, something the young gay person might not have available, and something they might not be able to ask their parents for without spilling the beans or coming out to them. There was a man in Dallas teaching 4th grade at an elementary school who recognized this need that was not being filled in the gay community, and he understood the circumstances around it. The man's name was Howie Dare, and many, if not most of you in the audience, knew him in one way or another. Howie felt that there was a real need in Dallas for affordable mental health care, and he tackled the problem. He decided to use his education and put his master's degree in counseling from the North Texas State University at the time, to work and start a counseling center that would be open to gay men and women, one that would make it affordable for them to come and receive help with their issues without their homosexuality automatically being diagnosed as their problem. Now, Howie was very handsome, sexy, energetic, playful, friendly, seductive. You get the idea. A man with a great body that he nurtured and of which he was very proud. A huge, dark mustache, muscled arms, piercing eyes, and a rabbit smile that made you want to follow him anywhere. And many did. He set about making his dream of creating a counseling center a reality. He sought financial support from Joe Fleming and Mike Grossman, among others. Counseling partnership with Candy Markham. He traveled to New York and California to study the counseling centers that were already operating there. and he opened the counseling center in a dilapidated old building next to the Esquire Theater on Oak Lawn Avenue in 1981. The center clearly answered a huge need in the community. Business soon flourished, and under Howie's guidance, the center quickly gained stature and became a respected facility in the Metroplex. Howie quit his bartending jobs at the Bayou Landing and at Baja's Supper Club to focus his time and energies on OLCS. And for a brief shining moment, people continued away and enjoy the newly found sexual freedoms. The music got louder, the dance floor moves got bolder, the parks got fuller, and the bars got busier. And while this was going on, there was a dark and scary cloud building off in the distance that few people had heard anything or knew anything about. Howie was a big player socially, not just in the Dallas area, but also on the East, West, and Gulf Coasts. He had an extensive social network and was well connected, popular with most people in the circles where he played. And because he often traveled to these places, he knew friends who had become mysteriously ill and quickly died. Even though very little was known about it at the time, it was evident that there was a killer disease on the loose. Dallas, at that time, was somewhat of a peripheral city. Things that happened in New York and San Francisco and Los Angeles and even Houston tended to show up in Dallas about a year after they did in the coastal cities. Howie and Candy Markham traveled to Houston in January of 1982 to attend an all-gay mental health conference. And it was here that they first learned about what was then called GRID, Gay-Related Immune Deficiency Syndrome. It was decided at this conference that it would be more appropriate to call this disease ARC, AIDS-related complex, and so they did. Howie likely put two and two together and figured out that this was the disease that was killing the people that he knew who had died in San Francisco, because he commented to Candy on the trip home from that conference that they needed to put some things in place and prepare for what was coming. And when Candy replied that they didn't know anything about the disease, Howie prophetically answered her, "Yes, I know, but we will, and we need to be prepared." So he had the foresight to see this thing that would be coming soon to Dallas. And once again, instead of waiting for the crisis to explode, Howie set things in motion to deal with the looming storm. He knew that education would be key to getting ahead of the crisis, so he started getting the word out at fundraisers and wherever he could, warning of this killer disease that he had heard about that was stalking gay men, urging them to take precautions and prepare. He transformed the Oak Lawn Counseling Center into the Oak Lawn Community Services to try to respond to the disease's inevitable devastation. He took Candy's phone away and set up a hotline at the center. And AIDS hit fast and AIDS hit hard in the months following this. People were getting sick, wasting away, losing their jobs, their homes, sometimes their families, and sometimes even those people who they thought were their friends. And sometimes they were dying painful and horrible deaths. It was a dark, frantic, and scary time. Friends were disappearing at such alarming rates that we often had to choose which memorial services we would go to and which we would have to miss. Those of us who fell into the category that Howie called the worried well, those of us who were not ill, were keeping the hotline busy. We could only assume that certainly we would be next. Every cold, every cough, every fever, every chill was cause for panic. You didn't dare ask about someone you hadn't seen in a week or two because you didn't want to deal with any more bad news. And the best advice that Howie or anyone else had to offer at first was to abstain from sex until we knew more about what was going on. One of the programs that Howie helped found at OLCS was an adult daycare center to relieve the caregivers for people with AIDS during the day and to provide socialization for the people with AIDS themselves. This was later named the DARE Center after Howie. The program that perhaps Howie was the most proud was the Buddy System, or the Buddy Project. The Buddy Project was made up of volunteers who were not really really involved in educational efforts, and people who were involved in support, not just financial support, but also emotional support and physical assistance. These volunteers were called buddies. They were people who were willing to do anything and everything they could to help people afflicted with this disease. At one time, there were over 100 people signed up on the Buddy Project. These people performed untiring service, and the good that came from their work was amazing. They provided transportation. They took medicine to the patients. They made sure that people with AIDS had the food and clothing and other basic necessities they needed at all times. Sometimes they cleaned the person's house or apartment. Sometimes they stayed with the person when their lover or full-time caretaker had to be away. And sometimes they had to travel long distances to perform their duties. This is a very organized and well-run program. It included monthly educational sessions, which we called the buddy training, which people could attend even if they had no plans to become a buddy, but just wanted to learn about AIDS and more about caring for people with AIDS. The programs that Howie had the foresight to initiate and the work that he did helped Dallas to deal and cope with the onslaught of terror. Because of his wide social circles, he was able to pull in literally armies of people to step up and go to work. He was always cognizant that the work that the programs of the Oaklawn Community Services was doing for the community was directly attributable to what the community was doing for OLCS. He also used his connections on the coasts to keep up with what was going on in those cities and try to stay ahead of the curve in Dallas. I often think about how different Dallas might be today if the Howie Dares and the Bill Nelsons and the John Thomases, the Ray Kuchlings and the Terry Thibodeaus and so many more who were lost to the AIDS crisis had lived and were here today. GLBT Dallas might be a very different place. But I also think about how different things would likely be today had we not been so fortunate to have these heroes with the visions and the wherewithal to foresee and to recognize and plan and prepare for things before they arrived, especially the devastation that came with AIDS that virtually wiped out a generation of talented and gifted men. Many cities didn't handle these crises in nearly as effective ways. They often found themselves trying to pick up the pieces after the crisis dealt its blows. Dallas was and is so lucky to have some of the talent that we do and have had in our community. And it's not just us in Dallas who recognize this. It's happened fairly often that I have found myself in settings where people from all over the nation are gathered for whatever reasons, cruises, parties, marches, weddings, whatever, and have people say when they learn that you're from Dallas, and after they make their jokes about the Dallas attitude, things like, you guys in Dallas have something special. The leadership and the ability to work together to get things done that you guys demonstrate is amazing. And I believe we do have something special in Dallas, and I think our history is unique and special. I was reminiscing recently with Candy Markham about Howie Dare, and I asked her why she thought it was important to record the history of GLBT Dallas. Her response was the quote, our lessons come often from the destination, our lessons come not from the destination, but from the journey. I believe that the work of the Dallas Way and of our friends at UNT who are helping us preserve it is important. It's timely and it's critical that we tell our story so that the people who come behind us know why it is that they are able to walk down the street and hold hands, or sit together in a North Dallas restaurant, or dance together at pretty much any club in town without being told to leave. And soon they will be able to marry each other in Texas. So it is important to record our history. The Oaklawn Counseling Center and the Oaklawn Community Services were an incredibly vital part of our community's history, and just one example of the many ways that Dallas dealt with and survived a crisis, a plague, if you will. It's something we should remember and take great pride in, just as we should preserve the memory of the psychotherapist. Harold Paul Dare, the founder of Oaklawn Counseling Center, the visionary and the doer, the handsome and popular gay leatherman with a huge mustache who started the first educational effort about AIDS in the Metroplex, instituting safe place programs for risk reduction through safe sex education. The first Grand Marshal of Dallas's Freedom Parade in 1985. The gay activist who served as a member of Dallas's Health and Human Services Commission and who testified before a House subcommittee on government operations regarding public health, seeking critical funding for AIDS projects. The director of Dallas AIDS Action Project and the inspiration for the OLCS Buddy Project, who received his diagnosis in September of 1985 at the age of 37 and succumbed to it some 300 days later in 1986, succumbed to the very disease that he was helping to fight. The memory of Howie Dare, his passion and compassion in the work that he did, should be inspiration and encouragement to us all, and it should live on for a long, long time. Thank you.